All right, guys, I am so excited to announce that our fall collection has officially dropped. You always hear me say at the end of every episode, stay safe, and it was very fitting that this collection be our Stay Safe collection. Not only are we donating a portion of all of the proceeds to the Child Rescue Coalition, who helps keep children safe. They're a great organization, and we've partnered with them many times in the past, but we also created an item that I just wanted to jump on and show you because we really want to help keep everybody safe. This is my absolute favorite item of this collection, and it's one that I have been working on for months trying to get it right, and it's our Stay Safe safety kit. And inside there are tools for hopefully any situation that you find yourself in. We have an emergency escape tool, so this is a glass breaker for windshields, for windows, also a seatbelt cutter. This is great to have in case you ever find yourself in a vehicle that you can't get out of, or if it goes underwater, God forbid. We also have our safety alarm. I'm not going to pull it because it's really loud, but it has a flashlight and a safety alarm with a very, very loud ringing. So this is great to just throw on your keys, or if you're running. We unfortunately have seen a huge uptick in crimes when people are out running. So safety alarm as well. This is our Stay Safe door lock, and this works with most hinged doors. Specifically, I wanted to create this for hotel rooms. There is a huge rise right now in hotel room break-ins, even by staff. And so this is a double lock that will help keep it locked, safe, and, secure. We also have this scrunchie, and it's not just a scrunchie, but let me just show you. You can wear it on your wrist when you go out, and inside of it is a drink cover, or as I like to say, the anti-roofie shield. And you can see this is where the straw goes. So you can pop that right there on your drink in case you're going to the bathroom, or if you're turning around talking with friends and so somebody doesn't slip something in. And I unfortunately was roofied when I was younger, which is why this is incredibly important to me. So we wanted to put it in this pouch so that it can easily fit in a glove box, in your purse, in a dorm room, in your house, wherever. It's just items that I believe will help keep you safe. And one of my main focuses right now is partnering with sororities to make sure that this is accessible for so many young women who are now going back to school and on campus, because I don't know if you knew this, but 1 in 4 women gets assaulted in some way in their college years. So just going a little step further and having a safety kit on hand for whatever situation you're in, it's something that was really important to me. And I'm hoping that this becomes a staple in our assortment. We did a limited run, but it's such a good gift for people. It's something I think everybody should just have, because you won't know you need those tools until, God forbid, you're in a situation where you need the alarm, you need to cut yourself out, you need to break the glass, something like that. So anyways, I wasn't going to come on here and talk about merch or do anything like that, but I did want to actually just show you the safety kit, because it is something that is so close to my heart and something I really feel strongly about, and I've been working on it for a long time. And again, a portion of all of the proceeds for the kit, for every single piece of merch this collection, will be donated directly to the Child Rescue Coalition. All of it can be found at our website, annieelise.com, and I appreciate you being patient while I showed all of this to you. We're going to get into today's case, and please, as a reminder for you, for loved ones, for friends, stay safe. Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I sound rather masculine today. I'm getting kind of sick. Actually, I've been sick. It's weird. I don't feel sick, but I have a really crazy cough, and it's in my lungs, and it's making my voice sound super raspy. And I was going to try to just wait it out and pause recording until I started feeling better, but it's just not going away. So here I am. I have to talk with you guys about this case because it is one that is so controversial, but I just wanted to let you know that's why I sound a little bit different. Now, the conspiracies in this particular case are honestly never ending. And by the time this video wraps up, I think that you're going to be sitting back and wondering to yourself, was this all a cover up? Was this some bad stroke of fate? What really is the truth here? It is definitely a wild one, and like I said, controversial. So we're gonna jump right into it. I want to talk to you guys for a minute about getting into debt, because I'm going to share a personal story with you as well that It happened to me just so that hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. But I feel like getting in debt, it's so easy. But getting out of it, it feels like the system is truly set up so that we don't. It creates anxiety, stress, it can just be soul crushing. And I get all of that. I remember when I was a lot younger, I opened up a credit card for a department store. I'll just say it, Nordstrom, thinking, okay, I'll pay it every month. I'll pay the minimum balance or I'll pay it in full. I'll get the points because they give you back rewards, thinking it was great. Same kind of mentality for airline points, right? I'll spend the money, I'll get the points, I'll be able to upgrade my ticket. But then before you know it, you are swimming in debt. The interest is insane. And so it's like you're paying the minimum amount, but that only covers the interest. So the debt amount just keeps going higher and higher. And pretty soon you don't even know how to get out. I have been there more times than I can count. So I get all of it. But I'm here to tell you that you do not have to go at it alone. There is a way out and help is available thanks to PDS Debt. PDS Debt has customized options for anybody who is struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, even medical bills. They truly care about getting you out of debt. And everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and get this, there's no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted. PDS Debt strives to understand your specific scenario and help provide you with alternative solutions to becoming debt-free. They truly do care about helping you get out of debt, and I wish I knew about this program sooner because it would have saved me a lot of stress, also a lot of money back when I was younger, less financially responsible, and I'm now sharing it with you so that they can help you if you are in a situation like that. So stop waiting and start saving. Get a free debt analysis right now at pdsdebt.com/10tolife. It only takes 30 seconds. That's pdsdebt.com/10tolife. pdsdebt.com/10tolife. In 2010, Paulette was 4 years old. She had been born on July 20th, 2005 to her parents Lisette and Mauricio in Mexico. It's technically a part of Greater Mexico City, exactly where she was, but it is independent of it. Now, she was the second child in her family, the baby. Even as she got older, she was still a very tiny little girl with these brown curls that formed little ringlets around her face. She had an older sister named Lisette after her mother, who was just a few years older than her. And from the outside looking in, Lisette and Mauricio had this very fairy tale style kind of love story. The kind of story that you could hear and just think, oh my God, could it get any more perfect? They got married in 2001. They had this huge over-the-top wedding with about 600 people attending, which honestly is like an insane number for me to even think about for any event, let alone a wedding. But they were both very successful, very happy on their own. And so when they got together, it was like they became this just like power couple, both like, again, happy and successful, and then just like, exploded. Now, Lisette's father was a Lebanese immigrant who became an extremely successful and wealthy businessman after immigrating to Mexico. And growing up in a wealthy family, of course, had its perks. There was no such thing as a budget when it came to Lisette, and more specifically, there was no budget when it came to her education. Her parents searched high and low for the best of the best when it came to schools in Mexico. Having a top-tier education paid off too, because as an adult, Lisette became a very successful and well-known attorney. Now, on the other side of things, Mauricio and his brothers had dabbled in real estate, and that took off. By the time that he met Lisette, he was a very successful businessman in his own right, just like Lisette's father. So like I said, together they were kind of like this bit of a power couple. A few years into their marriage, little baby Lisette came along, and then just a couple of years later, adult Lisette learned that she was pregnant again, and this baby was another little girl, their second. Now, when Lisette and Mauricio learned that they were expecting again, they were over the moon about the idea of having two little girls just running around the house, growing up together, growing up with that sisterly bond like so many young girls have. Now, this might be surprising given what a charmed life the parents seemed to have, but life from day one was a challenge for little Paulette, literally. There were complications during Lisette's pregnancy, and Paulette was born at only 25 weeks. Now, thanks to modern medicine, that isn't necessarily an automatic death sentence like it would have been at one time in life, but there are still plenty of complications that come with it. And sometimes, even with the best doctors, there's no guarantee that things are going to work out well. Paulette was only 1.7 pounds at birth. And from the moment that she entered the world, the doctors pretty much told Lisette and Mauricio to not really get their hopes up. And not in those words, of course, there was better bedside manner, but they didn't think that she was going to make it. And they didn't want them to be overly optimistic to then be disappointed. Now, shockingly, the little, not even 2-pound baby fought daily, and the doctors then started to have hope that maybe she was going to live after all. Being realistic, though, they warned her parents that even if she did survive this, she was very likely never going to have a, normal childhood, a normal life. They thought that Paulette was going to struggle with severe motor skills, language deficiencies. They even told her parents that the likelihood of her ever walking on her own was pretty much slim to none. Well, Lisette and Mauricio wanted the best for Paulette, meaning that when she was growing up, she got all of the best physical therapy that she could have and all of the medical care that they could afford. They weren't going to just accept that Paulette's disabilities were completely incurable. And all of those treatments were a game changer, especially something called horse therapy, which, I'll be honest, I don't really know that much about it, but apparently it helped teach her how to walk. She still couldn't get around completely on her own, but she wasn't stuck at square one like the doctors had predicted. Her language disability was also a huge struggle for her, so much so that even when she was almost 4 years old, Paulette couldn't form complete sentences. So again, she went through extensive therapies, and eventually she was able to communicate her needs and her wants through single words like mom, dad, food, water, things like that. So yes, although it wasn't full sentences or, strung together words, it was better than nothing. It was better than what the doctors had predicted for her when she was first born. Surviving it all was a miracle in and of itself, but the progress that she made those first few years of life was more than anybody could have asked for or hoped for. She made enough progress, as a matter of fact, that once she hit preschool age, she was able to attend school with all of the other children who were her own age. Granted, she still needed a little bit of extra help since she couldn't walk on her own or form complete sentences. And she also got help to do the schoolwork that the other children were doing on their own. So Paulette needed just as much help when she was at home. And Lisette and Mauricio were both very busy working professionals, and she clearly required much more attention than her older sister. So the couple decided to hire 2 nannies, one named Erica and one named Martha. They were actually both sisters, so they both worked as live-in nannies for little Paulette. Now remember, Lisette and Mauricio had money, so they could afford all of the help that Paulette needed. The family, including the 2 nannies, lived in a luxury high-rise apartment building. And now I don't want you to think like, okay, they must not have been that wealthy to live in an apartment. This was not like a 500 square foot kind of apartment. When I say luxury high-rise, I mean it. This place was so big, so bougie. They had all of this hired help always coming in and out to help with the upkeep. They had these live-in nannies. They also had plenty of housekeepers. I mean, they had it all. And this far into the story, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, you're right, Annie. This seems like this must be a pretty happy, loving, successful family who work together to make the difficult things in life run smoothly. Great. There was no question that they had money. Just going off of where they lived, the help that they hired, the expensive medical treatments, the therapies, the nannies, I mean, it was obvious. But as we all know, though, things aren't always as it seems. And sometimes it takes something major to start finally airing out the family's dirty laundry, one little piece at a time. So let's get right into when everything changed significantly for the worst for Lisette, Mauricio, and their entire family. This was in 2010. Paulette was 4 years old, and her older sister, Lisette, was 7 years old. Mauricio had planned a quick little getaway with his daughters, wanting to spend some quality time with them and just take a break from all of the work and life chaos, everything going on in general. Apparently, Lisette was busy that weekend. She already had plans to go out of town to visit a friend. So it was just Mauricio, Paulette, and Lisette Jr. The 3 of them traveled to Valle de Bravo, a town west of Mexico City that's right on a lake. It's a tourist destination and a good getaway for people who are looking for a beach but don't want to travel too far. So after a fun and relaxing weekend away, Mauricio and the girls got back home the evening of March 21st, 2010. Now, Lisette, the mother, was already home from her weekend trip, and she offered to get the girls ready for bed, giving them both baths, tucking them in, the whole 9 yards, just spending some of that quality time with them since she hadn't seen them in a few days. Then everybody went to bed for the night, just like they did every night. Now, the morning routines for the family were usually always the same each day. One of the nannies, either Erica or Martha, would wake the kids up, make their beds, get them ready for the morning. And this specific morning, it was Erica's turn to do the morning routine. But instead, all hell broke loose in this house. Erica went into Paulette's room around 8 a.m. She turned on the lights, and she was met with something that made her literally stop in her tracks in confusion. Paulette was not in her bed. She wasn't anywhere in her room at all. Erica, understandably confused, went and got her sister Martha, the other nanny. The two nannies looked high and low for Paulette. They looked all over her room, under her bed, in her closet, everywhere. Now, listening to this, you might be wondering why a 4-year-old not being in their bed in the morning caused such a big fuss. It's pretty common for 4-year-olds to not want to stay in their bed, especially if they get hungry, maybe thirsty during the night, or they want to crawl in bed with their parents. Sometimes, I know my kids do, they even just want to get up and start playing in like the middle of the night. I'm like, chill, it's not time. But remember, just getting up and wandering around the house wasn't an option for Paulette due to her disabilities. She could only walk with the help of her parents or the nannies. So yeah, the fact that she wasn't in bed now was strange, and not just strange, downright concerning. So running out of options, Erica and Martha went into Lisette and Mauricio's room, thinking, okay, maybe for some odd reason, they may have gotten Paulette out of bed, taken her into their room during the night. It would have been really out of character and a break in the routine, but it wasn't impossible. But a quick search of Lisette and Mauricio's room confirmed that the nanny's worst fears were true. Paulette wasn't there either. After searching a bit on their own just to be sure, Erica and Martha finally went to Lisette and Mauricio and just straight up told them they had no idea where Paulette was. According to the nannies, neither Lisette or Mauricio seemed concerned though, not whatsoever, which struck them as a very odd reaction. Again, it's not like Paulette was just playing this intense game of hide and seek. They knew just as well as the nannies did that Paulette didn't get out of bed unless one of them physically got her out of bed themselves. But for whatever reason, they were kind of just like, no big deal. The housekeepers who were there that morning were full of concern. They started looking everywhere alongside Erica and Martha. And when they had thoroughly searched the entire apartment with no luck, they even went through the whole apartment building itself. But you know who did not lift a single finger in any of those searches? Lisette and Mauricio. And to make things even weirder, if that's even possible this early on in the story, neither one of Paulette's parents called the police and reported her as missing. Apparently, Mauricio just casually mentioned something to his sister about Paulette being missing, and she then at least had some common sense and started freaking out in all of this, so she was the one who ended up calling the local police and getting them involved. So the detectives made their way over to the apartment to get a better understanding of what they were looking at, and quite a few things stood out to them. For starters, Paulette still hadn't been found. They searched high and low in the whole apartment, as well as the rest of the building, so that meant that both of the nannies, the maids, and the police were all searching for Paulette. And this was a pretty lavish apartment, but it was also no mansion with rooms upon rooms or anything like that. There weren't a lot of places where a disabled 4-year-old could somehow manage to hide. But she clearly wasn't there. And obviously, if Paulette couldn't leave on her own, the next best guess that anybody would have was that someone had to have come in and taken her, right? Well, that theory had its own issues. For starters, Paulette's room was on the second floor. The apartment had 2 stories, and Paulette lived on the top story. The only way to get into Paulette's room from the outside was through the window, which I guess never say never. It wasn't impossible, but highly unlikely. On top of that, there were no signs of forced entry or anything on the window that appeared to have been tampered with. None of the locks on the doors were tampered with either, and the apartment essentially looked completely untouched. Along those same lines, there were no signs of a struggle in Paulette's room. Everything looked normal. Her parents' room was right next door to hers, and when they were interviewed by the investigators, they said that they never heard anything strange during the night. So it never occurred to them that they had any reason to be worried or nervous. The family even had 2 dogs who, like most dogs, they will bark or they will growl if a stranger comes anywhere near the home. So basically, they would have made some kind of noise if a stranger had broken in. Now, when I first started researching this story, I thought, okay, well, maybe at first we were just working with some seriously, impressive intruders. But get this, the apartment building had cameras all over it. Outside, inside, in hallways, behind the building, everywhere. Now, we deal with a ton of cases where there are security cameras around potential crime scenes, and they end up not working for whatever reason. They're essentially pointless. But these cameras, they worked. They were working just fine. So the investigators combed through every single second of camera footage from the time that Mauricio and the girls got back home from their trip to then when she was reported as missing. and there was no footage of Paulette leaving or being carried out of the building. She went inside her home, but seemingly never came back out. Now, this wasn't something that was ever mentioned, but I can't help but wonder if they ever looked specifically at anybody passing the security cameras during that time period with maybe suitcases or a duffel bag or something like that. Because remember, Paulette was only 4. She was also pretty tiny. So the idea of somebody possibly carrying her in something like a big bag or a suitcase out of the building, it doesn't seem to me like a totally out there theory. We also have seen this happen many times. It just makes me wonder what the thought process was of the detectives and if that was ever something that was considered or looked into, but I digress. So pretty much as soon as Paulette went missing on March 22nd, the story of her odd disappearance blew up. I am talking almost immediately. There were flyers all over the city with her face and her information just plastered on them. Billboards, ads on public transit, TV, you name it. The Attorney General of Mexico, a man named Alberto, also quickly became heavily involved in the case alongside the authorities. Alberto's name comes up a lot whenever you dive into this case for many different reasons, as a matter of fact. Now, obviously, when a child goes missing, the more media attention, the better. You'll never hear me saying that a missing child's case has gotten too much attention. Never. However, for some of the locals and even some people who were all the way in the States but following this case, it was almost like this was some sort of frustration for them. See, there were a lot of kids in Mexico who were missing, but Paulette's case seemed to be the only one that was really taken seriously. It felt like it was the only one that really got that much attention that quickly after she had been reported as missing. For the other hundreds upon hundreds of missing kids, they weren't getting billboards or flyers or things passed out on every street corner. No attorney general was helping to find them. And again, that's not me saying that Paulette's case didn't deserve the attention, but in a perfect world, every missing child's case would get treated like this. However, it's important to the backstory to acknowledge the concerns that people had when this was happening, because this was kind of the start of a bunch of conspiracies and insinuations that the family's wealth was a huge key factor in this whole investigation. A lot of people even thought that the involvement of Alberto, the Attorney General, was suspicious, and they began picking through everything that he did with a fine-tooth comb. Paulette and her family were all that anybody could talk about for quite some time. Nothing about her disappearance made sense. Detectives searched through the family's apartment literally 5 separate times during the first day of the investigation alone. Cadaver dogs were brought in. I mean, no resource was left untouched. According to the BBC, it's reported that there were at least 100 different people coming in and out of the apartment at the start of the investigation. They were doing media interviews, police interviews, forensic searches, so on and so forth. Just a massive effort. Now, speaking of media interviews, I want to get into one interview in particular. Since this all happened in Mexico City, the video of this interview is in Spanish, and I couldn't find anything that was translated to English, so if you are fluent in Spanish, definitely go check it out for yourself so that you can really get a feel for it firsthand, better than I can explain it. But for those of you who can't do that, I am going to briefly describe the video and what goes down during it. Lisette and the reporter were sitting on Paulette's bed in her room. They were surrounded by her girly pink pillows, all of her blankets, and Lisette and the reporter were even cuddling her stuffed animals in their hands. It's clear that the interviewer was trying to pull at viewers' heartstrings by sitting in this last place that Paulette was seen, also surrounded by things, by her mother, who was the last person to have seen her. And at one point, the interviewer asked Lisette to go through some of Paulette's things and show them to the camera, like her toys and one specific set of pajamas that she said belonged to Paulette. Nothing too wild or out there, at least not at this point, but we're going to stick a pin in that and come back to it later. So during this, Lisette became emotional, and she begged the public for help finding her little girl. But that wasn't it. She also pretty much insinuated that Paulette's disappearance was planned, and that her family was specifically targeted due to their wealth. She begged Paulette's kidnappers to not harm her in any way. She told them that they would do whatever they had to do in order to get Paulette back, as long as she was safe and okay. She even encouraged these potential captors at one point to just drop Paulette off at the mall or the supermarket, anywhere. And that just didn't sit right with people. I don't know if at this point when the interview went live, the police had even suggested that they were considering a ransom abduction as a theory, so I can't comment on how out there the whole idea of it was. However, the people who watched this video just thought that it was odd that Lisette was pulling this whole ransom idea out of nowhere. essentially out of nowhere, actually. I mean, how could a kidnapper get in or out of this apartment without leaving any single piece of evidence or showing up on any of the security cameras? Not to mention, if you're going to kidnap a kid for ransom, you have to actually do the ransom part. Nobody ever got a note or a message. Nobody ever called to ask for money. So basically, this ransom idea, it felt a little ridiculous. Now, apart from that viral interview, Mauricio also did some interviews on his own where he also begged for his daughter to be safely returned. So there was just this huge push from both of them from the very beginning that Paulette was being held captive, waiting for some ransom money that was never even requested at any point. And to some people, it didn't sit right. And to other people, it just didn't seem all that suspicious. Maybe they wanted to believe that there was some kind of world where Paulette could be returned alive and safe rather than the worst possible outcome. But then 1 week went by with no sign of Paulette. Then on March 29th, the Attorney General went to the press with new information about Paulette's case. And what he had to say made everybody's jaw drop. He reported that Lisette, Mauricio, and both of the nannies, Erica and Martha, were all in police custody. And he really dropped a bomb during this interview, and he was going in on all 4 of them. He said each one of them at a certain moment has falsified their statements, which has made it difficult to know the truth of the facts and clarify a firm line of investigation. So basically what I'm hearing is that none of them could get their stories and the facts straight, which is definitely odd. Now, it's important to note that yes, they were all taken into custody, but they were not all charged. It's also important to add that we don't really know the exact details of what those different stories looked like and how they varied from each person to the next. The Attorney General said that they were inconsistent, but I don't know the exact in and out of what those inconsistencies were, whose stories were contradicting whose. I don't know all of the details, which, trust me, is frustrating. But he said that both Lisette and Mauricio in particular had been extremely evasive and defensive. His words, not mine. They said that they were like this during the entire investigation. But the police had gotten their hands on what they were referring to as undercover recordings. And in these, it was apparently where Lisette and Mauricio were talking to their oldest daughter and essentially telling her not to talk to the investigators or else she would get in trouble. During one part of the recordings, little Lisette asked why, and adult Lisette told her, because otherwise they will blame us for stealing her, or that you took her away to be stolen. Now, initially when this undercover video came out, Lisette had a lot to say about it. She tried saying that somebody had gone in, edited it purposefully, making it sound like she was specifically asking her daughter to not talk to the investigators and not give up any information, kind of like a setup. Now, I know a lot of these cases we usually have more backstory on how the investigators got a hold of such a huge recording like that, but I honestly could not find any details other than the Attorney General just saying that it existed. And when I think of undercover, I think of somebody maybe wearing a wire, but again, there's really no mention of that. So I genuinely have no clue how these recordings were made or how the investigators ended up hearing them. But anyway, Lisette must have realized how out there this whole excuse sounded, because she eventually switched her tone about this whole thing, saying it wasn't edited. It was now just out of context. So still essentially playing the victim card and taking no real accountability for the words that very clearly came out of her mouth, but okay. Now remember, that press release was on the 29th. 2 days later, on March 31st, the investigators came up with a new plan and a new angle of attack to move forward with the case. Not to say they hadn't been working hard and diligently, because I'm sure that they had, but they weren't making any real progress, so now they needed to do a full 180. So the police decided that they were going to all go back to the family apartment and kind of search for clues and come up with a better game plan. This included working on a better timeline for the night when Paulette disappeared. As soon as the detectives arrived at the apartment, though, they were immediately greeted with an overwhelming stench. And as they walked through, the smell just got stronger and stronger until finally they arrived at the door to Paulette's bedroom. Every last one of those detectives probably would have bet their life savings that that smell was coming from her room. And it was a million times worse right there in the doorway. So they went into the room, and when they did, they very quickly came upon a gruesome discovery. The smell, a horrible gut-turning smell that couldn't be passed off as anything else but something decomposing. It was coming from a bundle of sheets at the foot of Paulette's bed. It was wedged in between her mattress and the bed frame, and inside of the sheets was Paulette, sadly deceased and decomposing. Now, when I was first reading up on this case, I was trying to wrap my head around where exactly Paulette's body was so that I could really make sense of things. In particular, how everyone missed her remains during search after search after search. All the searches that they did, that they were looking for Paulette in the first few days, and that first day, the 5 searches, how did somebody miss this? I mean, none of it will probably ever make sense, but when I first was imagining the crime scene, I thought that maybe her body was wedged in between a wall and her mattress, if that makes sense. Almost like she would have been well hidden until the smell then led the police right to her. But that wasn't the case. I want to reiterate that her body was at the foot of the bed, and her bed was in the middle of the room, no walls on either side. The foot of her bed was directly pointing to the bedroom door. Some pictures were released during a press conference which showed the little girl's body in relation to where it was found. Now, one thing that's clear to me is that there was just no possible way in hell that her body was there the entire time and not a single soul saw her. I know I've already said this, but I feel like it needs to be said again just to really sink in how insane it is that Erica and Martha searched her entire room the morning that she went missing and did not see her anywhere. Her room was then searched 5 separate times by the police the very first day of her disappearance. Nothing. Not to mention the countless reporters and camera crews who were inside the room. 100 different people went in and out over the short course of the investigation. Heck, even cadaver dogs were brought in. There was just no way that this was some kind of simple mess up or mistake, that somebody just missed it and was like, oh, sorry, my bad, I didn't see a body here. No chance in hell. Even in that interview that Lisette did, she was sitting right at the foot of the bed at one point. Literally not even a foot away from where Paulette's body was found. So of course common sense says, okay, Paulette was probably killed. Her body was stored somewhere for a few days in a different location. Then the killer moved her back into her room somehow without it being seen. It should be a pretty simple process of doing some forensic and figuring out who would have had access to Paulette's room, right? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't that simple. See, Paulette's room was never closed off or treated like it was a potential crime scene. Obviously, there were a ton of investigators going in and out, and I'm sure they hopefully, took all of the right precautions, like wearing gloves and whatnot. But clearly, from what we now know so far, it wasn't just them going in and out. The news interviewer had literally been sitting on that bed just a few feet away from where Paulette's body would end up being found. Cameramen, I mean, you name it. Everyone was quite literally sticking their hands all over everything in the area and on the bed, which, talk about contamination at its finest. On top of that, apparently a family friend named Amanda had been staying at the apartment after Paulette disappeared. And instead of sleeping on the couch or on the floor or on an air mattress, she was literally staying in Paulette's room, sleeping in her bed. Which, guys, I'm just as shocked at that as I'm sure you guys all are. I honestly have no idea what the reason was for why she was staying at their apartment. The only thing that I can think of is maybe to take care of the dogs, but even that sounds like such an insane stretch to me when there's an active missing persons investigation going on. And I know that everybody also reacts to grief differently, but I feel like it's pretty common for families of missing or deceased children to preserve their kids' rooms exactly as they were the day that they left, so that if they return, things are still, normal and look the same. So to let someone come in and essentially ruin all of that, it's just weird. Not to mention how this basically contaminated the entire scene, pretty much guaranteeing that it would be that much harder for the police once Paulette did turn up. On top of that, Amanda apparently told the police that while she was staying there, her morning routine was to get up every morning and make Paulette's bed. Just tidying things up and being the best house guest possible, I guess? I don't know. Now, there's 2 possible ways of explaining all of this. Amanda must have either really been horrible at making beds, or Paulette's body could not have possibly been there this entire time. And I get it, Paulette was pretty tiny, but there is just no way that you're going to convince me that Amanda got up every morning and didn't see or ignored a wrapped up sheet with a body in it at the foot of the bed. It's just not realistic. I would even say it's impossible. Which then kind of leads me into my next tangent, because as insane as all of this already sounds, it just gets even wilder. Now, we know how this all played out because the police released a video of the search where they found Paulette's body, which is crazy because all of this went out to the public without it being censored or anything, which is so insane to me. But the police said that they wanted to share the video as proof of exactly how Paulette's body had been found. Now that in and of itself just tells you how big this case was at the time and how widespread all of the conspiracies were at this point. The fact that they felt like they needed to prove to the public that they were being honest about discovering a body is strange, to say the least. But even with this attempt to be transparent, a lot of people felt like it was a little odd that this video was taken about 2 a.m. It was just a very weird time to be doing a search, especially a not that urgent search of this room that had already been searched so many different times. It was like, okay, this can't wait until the day shift starts? What do you mean? Now, the beginning of this video shows 3 forensic experts going into Paulette's room and then heading towards her bed. They take measurements and they describe what the bed looks like for the record. Then one of the experts says that Paulette was severely beaten to death. Now, this is something he says not just once, but twice. Keep in mind, we haven't even gotten to the point in the video where Paulette's body is visible. They literally only walked into her room at this point and basically pointed out her bed. So why he's saying this is beyond me. Next, working from the top of her bed to the bottom, the forensic experts pull back the blanket. And then this is when they start describing the noticeable bloodstains on Paulette's bed. There are 2 bloodstains, and one is the size of an adult human head. Now, not to get too off track from the video, but remember the family friend Amanda, who was literally staying in Paulette's bed, making her bed every single day? You're telling me that she didn't see either of these ginormous bloodstains? Make it make sense. So then it takes a pair of police officers working together at the same time to remove the final parts of the sheets, which then reveals Paulette's body. Again, wedged between the footboard and the mattress. Now here's the biggest, weirdest thing about this entire video. The police literally released it because they basically said, hey, here's our proof we're being honest about who, what, when, and why everything went down. So based on that explanation, you would think that this means that the video captured everything live as it was happening, right? Not like a reenactment or anything like that. Well, they didn't really specify that. And it might not sound like it matters or that it really, needs to be specified, but it definitely does. If this was supposed to be some kind of live footage, there were plenty of red flags. The main one being that the expert who said that Paulette had been severely beaten without even seeing her body yet. The second thing, which is more opinion-based than anything else, is that people who have seen the video claim that the experts are speaking in a monotone voice, almost as though they're reading off of a script. Plus, there's the fact that they didn't seem all that shocked to be finding a body. And if the video was a reenactment, why not just say that? And why would they basically contaminate and mess up the crime scene by literally wrapping up Paulette's body and then putting the covers back over her bed? Why not just leave the body as it was, explain in the video like, hey, these bed sheets right here were pulled up all the way and then this sheet right here was wrapped around the body that you're seeing now, but it just wasn't making sense. So either way, whether it was a reenactment or a live video, there were plenty of red flags that the police were not being totally honest in this situation. Now, when this video was released, the Attorney General had plenty of commentary to add to this, and people were going nuts. He said that the video showed and proved that Paulette's cause of death was an accidental strangulation. Yeah, you heard that right, an accidental strangulation. I thought she was beaten to death, right? That's what the other guy claimed before he even laid eyes on her. Now, he claimed that this was all just an unfortunate circumstance of a disabled person getting stuck, not being able to move herself, and then sadly passing away. He also never once mentioned anything about Paulette being beaten. So is everybody just now supposed to ignore the fact that these experts literally said twice that she had been beaten? That seems to me like it would be difficult for a professional forensic investigator to get wrong, right? Not to mention all of the evidence that suggested that Paulette's body wasn't there the entire time and probably was moved. So why would that happen if she died in an accident? And again, if the police did get it wrong when they said that it was a beating, why wouldn't the Attorney General mention that and clear the air? There are just so many different things about this case that you could seriously question all day long, and it would never make any more sense than when you first started. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Paulette's parents and both of the nannies had been taken into custody, but none of them were ever charged with anything. Sure, they all apparently seemed pretty suspicious and even uncooperative, but there was no evidence to really arrest them for anything. So after a few days, they were all allowed to leave police custody. Granted, they were still under investigation and they weren't allowed to leave the country, but they were free to leave. And instead of sticking together as a family to get through this absolutely horrific time, Paulette's parents completely turned on one another, and every little detail of their dirty laundry was finally aired. So apparently they weren't this happy, wealthy, successful family that everybody thought them to be. Money was apparently tight. Having all of these nannies, these maids, and paying for the most expensive treatments for Paulette, it was completely draining them. Aside from the financials, Lisette and Mauricio were far from getting along and having this happy, healthy marriage. Remember how Lisette couldn't go on that weekend trip with Mauricio and the girls because she had already had plans to go out of town with, a friend on a trip? Well, it turns out that this friend of hers was actually a lover. She was cheating on Mauricio. Now, once this came out, a lot of people figured that Lisette had to be the main suspect, mainly because she was the last one to have been with Paulette, not to mention that weird undercover audio recording. And instead of standing up for his wife, proclaiming her innocence and, everything that goes along with it, Mauricio was the one who was pointing the biggest finger right at her. He claimed that he was suspicious of her before the police even were. And when a local news station interviewed him and basically asked him if he would speak on behalf of Lisette, he refused. He straight up said he could only speak to his own innocence, not hers. And he wasn't just talking this big game for the reporters, though. He was also apparently telling Lisette these things to her face. In a separate interview with the same news station, Lisette broke down in tears and said that Mauricio had told her he never wanted to see her again. Apparently, he was so angry at her that he even told her not to come to Paulette's wake. When the interviewer asked her, why she thought Mauricio would be suspicious of her, she pretty much blamed it entirely on the police, not on her own actions, which, of course, we see that all the time. But she told the interviewer, "The investigators have played a lot with our minds. Maybe he didn't have enough trust in me because I have never doubted him." Well, shockingly, when Paulette's autopsy results came in, the coroner basically exonerated Lisette and Mauricio, and everybody else. The report showed that Paulette's official cause of death was, quote, asphyxiation that obstructed the respiratory airways and compressed the abdominal thorax. In simple terms, apparently Paulette slept with something called an orthopedic cloth over her face, which essentially is just something that forces you to breathe through your nose instead of your mouth. The coroner thought that Paulette was wearing that when she got trapped in the sheets, and that allegedly that's what led to her death. However, there's a lot of controversy surrounding these things online for both adults and children. I have no idea if this is something that was recommended by doctors for her disabilities, or if it was something that her parents felt like would be a good fit for her. I'm not sure. But the autopsy report also showed that there were no signs of drugs or any other toxic substances in her body which would have affected her consciousness. It was also found that she had eaten around 5 hours before her death. On top of all of that, the report claimed that there were no signs of her body being manipulated or moved after her death, and the report claimed that the position that she was found in was the exact position that she died in. But something I find really interesting about the report is that it said that Paulette could have died anywhere from 5 to 9 days before her body was found. I know that once decomposition gets involved, sometimes it's really difficult to narrow down a timeline like that, but that is a pretty big difference, right? If it was 9 days, then yeah, she would have passed on the same day that she was reported as missing. But if it was 5 days, then what happened during those first 4 days after her disappearance? Are we just supposed to assume that while people were searching her room, she was still alive, wrapped up in her blankets at the end of her bed, and nobody noticed? That Amanda slept there in bed with her while she was dying? No, that doesn't make much sense. Something else that people questioned was why nobody smelled the odor of her body decomposing if she was apparently there the entire time. Supposedly, the reasoning behind that was that the blankets were so wrapped tight around her that they trapped that odor inside of it, which I don't know if I believe that, and I'm no expert here, but it definitely doesn't sound right. You mean to tell me that for 8 days straight, a blanket is going to cover the stench of a dead body, but then magically on the 9th day, the odor is just going to be coming out so strong out of nowhere and be so strong that the investigators can smell it from the moment they open the door to the apartment? It just does not make sense to me. Now, even after Paulette's death was ruled to have been accidental, Mauricio was still not buying it. And he made it very clear that he was still holding a pretty big grudge against Lisette. So much so that when he learned Lisette was going to be at Paulette's funeral, he straight up didn't go. Now, it's hard to sit back and try to dissect both Mauricio and Lisette's actions here. Was Mauricio blaming Lisette simply because he was so overcome with grief that he needed somebody to blame? Like, did he point the finger at her from some sort of knee-jerk reaction or irrational thinking, or because she was having an affair? Or did he actually think that Lisette was capable of something like this, something like harming her own child? Then there's the fact that it's just strange to not go to your own daughter's funeral, even if Lisette was the last person in the world that he wanted to see. So was this anger coming from his frustration that she was cheating, or because of Paulette's death, or maybe even both? I don't know, guys, but it's weird to me. Mauricio's actions after Paulette's disappearance weren't completely perfect either. I mean, don't get me wrong. I still don't understand why he called his sister and just chatted about Paulette being missing rather than calling the police. But regardless, it seems like when we really sit back and look at what little information we have to go off of, Lisette does keep looking stranger and stranger. And Mauricio wasn't the only one who was having a hard time accepting this whole accidental death ruling. Basically, every other person in Mexico and even over here in the United States who had been keeping up with this case felt like something just was not right. So naturally, people were digging into the evidence. They were trying to see if there was anybody who might want to hurt Paulette, someone who the police might be willing to cover for. Now, I've already talked about Lisette and Mauricio, but let's also not forget that the police also arrested the two nannies, Erica and Martha. After the announcement that Paulette's death was being ruled as an accident, both the media and the police pretty much let them off the hook completely. But it's not hard to wonder whether they were in on the whole thing altogether. They had apparently been working for this family for 7 years, so I'm sure that they got pretty close over time. And people wondered if that closeness could have meant that they were willing to help cover up a crime, since Erica was the one who couldn't find Paulette that morning, and neither of the nannies had bothered to contact the police and report her as missing. Which, I kind of understand that part. If I was a nanny in that situation, I would probably assume that the parents had already had that under control, but that's just me. But either way, both nannies spoke out claiming their innocence. Some of their family members even talked to the press about how they could not have done it. Interestingly enough, both of the nannies also told the media that they didn't buy the accidental death ruling either, and they especially don't believe that her body was there the whole time. So all to say, nobody was buying what the police were trying to push, and the internet super sleuths were working overtime, coming up with all sorts of theories. Now remember the interview Lisette did with a local news channel where she was sitting on Paulette's bed? Like I mentioned earlier, Lisette was filmed going through Paulette's things, showing the camera. She showed off some of her toys, her stuffed animals, that kind of thing. After Paulette's body was found, the news station did something that was pretty bold in my opinion. They released the entire uncut version of the interview with Lisette, which included all of the prep that they did in advance, where Lisette and the reporters went over everything that they wanted to discuss in the interview in detail. During that conversation, Lisette shows them a pair of pajamas that she claimed were Paulette's. And this is huge, because those exact same pajamas that she held up were the exact ones that Paulette was wearing when her body was found.
Entonces esa noche de domingo usted ya la trajo aquí a que se acostara. Cambié la luz un poco, ¿verdad?
La apagó.
Este es el pijama, ¿verdad?
No, esa es la pijama de mi grande.
De su niña, ¿no?
Ok. Ya ni quiero decir que tengo, pero no vayamos.
Sí, más vale, ¿verdad?
Pero mejor mira la pijama ni la sacamos.
Si quiere, platíqueme nada más
Sí.
de los
¿Pero qué te platico?
los dibujos. Estos los hizo en la escuela.
Sí.
So if this interview took place days before Paulette's body was found and she hadn't been moved or anything like that, how in the world did those pajamas end up on her body? Of course, though, Lisette had a perfect explanation. She said that they belonged to Paulette's older sister. She was showing the reporter her daughter Lisette's pajamas, not Paulette's, which I get having multiple sets of clothes that work for you and your kids and having your kids match. And it's not the idea of having multiple sets of the same pajamas that's so out there. It's the fact that she was specifically showing those in the interview and saying that they were Paulette's. So why lie about something as small as that? I'm sure she had plenty of other pajamas in her closet that Lisette could have shown the interviewer, so why go through the trouble of then going to her older sister's closet, taking out one of her outfits for the interview, and then it coincidentally matches the exact ones that Paulette was found in dead just days later. I genuinely cannot wrap my head around any of it. It does not make sense to me. It seems like there was just an excuse for everything. Also, people began pointing out that they felt like Lisette acted pretty nonchalant and emotionless about the entire disappearance and discovery of Paulette's body. According to the San Diego Union Tribune, a legal psychiatric expert who worked closely with the investigators during this case said that in her professional opinion, Lisette might suffer from some type of personality disorder. She described Lisette's actions by saying, "She has always remained very distant in matters of affection and emotional attachment. She has lied. In short, there are characteristics that speak of a mental disorder." And I mean, I guess it's some sort of explanation, but I don't know, guys. In fact, I'm going to say that I'm not all that surprised that there are a lot of theories out there about who really killed Paulette. Because honestly, it's really hard to believe this whole accidental strangulation theory. I don't get it. Now, first, there's the theory that somebody in Paulette's family killed her. Maybe it was Mauricio or Lisette working separately or together. Some people even wondered if Paulette's older sister could have accidentally harmed her and then their parents covered it up, also that they could protect her. Kind of like one of the main theories in the JonBenet Ramsey case. But saying that a 7-year-old somehow killed her younger sister just doesn't really fit to me. The only thing you could really even consider as evidence to support that theory is those undercover recordings where Lisette is basically scaring little Lisette into not talking to the police. But it also feels just as possible to me that Lisette and Mauricio were threatening her with the possibility of getting in trouble to scare her into keeping quiet. She was young enough that she would believe that threat. She wouldn't think that they were lying to her. Which brings me to the other reason that this theory makes no sense to me. If little Lisette really did hurt Paulette by accident, and if Paulette died because of whatever she did, it's not like the police were going to haul a 7-year-old off to prison. It would have been an accident. She was a young child. There would be no reason for this whole elaborate cover-up when Lisette and Mauricio could have just easily explained what happened to the police. It's very sad and tragic, but these things do happen. We've seen them a few times. So I think the theory that makes the most sense is that one or both of her parents killed her. There's also some speculation online that Lisette and Mauricio just couldn't deal with having a disabled child anymore. And on top of that, we know that they couldn't really afford it anymore either. Lisette has actually said openly and on the record that she doesn't blame people for thinking that she had something to do with Paulette's death. She also has always claimed that she is innocent. Mauricio has said the same thing about himself, but he also still has said that he thinks Lisette did have something to do with it, that she did do something to her. As for those official rulings that Paulette died in a freak accident, the theory is that the couple paid the authorities to pretty much cover the crime up. That's why nobody ever saw her body in the countless searches, and it explains those weird forensic videos and the Attorney General insisting that this whole thing was an accident and then just swiftly closing up the case. Which, yeah, the family was running out of money, but they also came from wealth. Not just wealth, in fact, but well-known, well-to-do families, specifically Lisette. Her grandfather was apparently very close with the governor of Mexico, and guess who else was allegedly close to the governor? Attorney General. So do you see how now all these connections are kind of weird coincidences and they're lining up? Now also get this. The Attorney General faced so much backlash about how this case was handled that he literally resigned from his position on May 26, 2010. Interestingly enough, in his resignation, he claimed that he still stood by the official ruling. But he claimed that as Attorney General, he needed to have confidence in his skills and in his work, and that his confidence pretty much went down the drain due to the media backlash that was now against him. Basically, he was saying, I'm quitting, but this is everybody else's fault, not mine. It's your fault for not believing in me. To which, sure, okay, I'm sure that's what's going on. Now, the most interesting thing about this whole case is that no matter who is pointing the finger at who, absolutely nobody, besides the Attorney General apparently, believes that this was an accident. Nobody really believes that Paulette's body was in her room this whole time. The nannies both said that there was no way that they wouldn't have seen her. The family friend Amanda, who was literally sleeping in her bed and making it daily, also said that there was no way that she wouldn't have seen her or smelled it. Lisette has even said that she doesn't think that her body could have been there this whole time. So what's the truth? What really happened? Well, on May 3rd, 2017, which was 7 years after Paulette's death, her body was exhumed and cremated. The reason for this was that the authorities basically said that since it was all accidental and her remains weren't evidence, they just didn't need to keep them around anymore. And I'm not trying to sound like super full-blown conspiracy theorist over here, but do we really think that that was why? Or do we think that maybe whoever was behind this whole thing got too nervous that maybe one day her body would be re-examined and it would open up a whole different can of worms? I was trying to find updates on this case to figure out what's going on because it's been quite a few years, and it seems like Paulette's family has been laying pretty low. The only interesting update that I could find is that the Attorney General actually ended up getting back in the headlines. The reason for this was because he became the head of Mexico's intelligence agency. Great. Now, I also want to say one other theory out there is that the police did this, that there was some sort of ransom, that the police were involved, they had hid her body off-site, then they brought her back, and that they planted this whole, accidental story, and that the police had more in a hand in this than what we know. I don't know. What do you guys think? Because I know that this was a lot of information and a lot of conspiracy theories, but I want to know from you guys what you think in the comment section, because I can't understand. Was this seriously an unfortunate accident that had the worst set of circumstances and coincidences surrounding it? Or was this a cover-up and a heinous murder of a sweet, disabled 4-year-old little girl? And if so, who was behind it? What was the motive? Who did the crime? Who helped the cover-up? I don't know. There are so many theories. My head is spinning. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode today and hearing Paulette's story. I will be back with you very soon. Let me know what you guys think below. And until the next one, stay safe. Bye.